Hello and welcome. You are watching Global Eye and I'm Parikshit Luthra. US President Donald Trump has put a 90-day pause on the sweeping tariffs announced on trading partners last week. The baseline tariff of 10% continues to be in place, but the rest has been suspended till July. However, Trump refused to exempt China and instead hiked the tariffs, instigating an all-out trade war between the two countries. After a lot of back and forth, the Chinese Commerce Ministry said it will not react to any further tariff increases by the US. It said, and I quote, "It will no longer make economic sense and will become a joke in the history of the world economy." End of quote. China's President Xi Jinping held bilateral talks with Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and said there are no winners in a trade war. And China is not afraid. This was his first reaction to the US tariffs. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump called Xi Jinping a good friend and a smart guy as he expressed optimism about striking a trade deal with China. Many countries have reached out to the US to strike new trade deals, and India is one of them. Government sources have told CNBC-TV18 that US Vice President J.D. Vance may soon visit India for trade talks, and Indian officials could visit the US. Sources also say it will be difficult to have a bilateral trade agreement in 90 days, but the form and shape of such a deal could be decided as well. All right, let me go across to Todd Buchholz, who is a former White House official, in fact, the director of economic policy at the White House. Todd, thank you so much for joining us. You've had tremendous experience in working with the White House on economic policy, a regular commentator on US markets as well. Give us a sense that Trump may have paused the tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, but the 25% tariff on steel, aluminium, autos still remain. The 10% baseline tariff is still in effect. The China tariff has been hiked to 145%. Enough grounds for a recession?
Well, we're certainly putting the world economy in a squeeze, in a vice, and the screws are turning and the risks are rising. And one way to see that is through the performance of the bond market. Usually when the prospects of a recession become greater, when it looks like the economy is weakening, interest rates go down. But this week, and this is what really, I think, had shaken the White House and shaken the Oval Office, interest rates started crawling up, which meant world investors were getting very concerned about the stability of the global system and the stability of the US Treasury market. And so we are now at the point where the word stagflation is rising. That is recession plus inflation simultaneously. So that's the risk. That's what President Trump needs to avoid. I believe that's why he imposed on himself this 90-day hiatus to allow for further negotiations.
Right. That indeed is an important point. So you said that there is, of course, a risk of recession. There is a risk of heightened inflation as well. Could you give us a sense of the factors that are going to weigh in and weigh on the US markets in the months to come? We've seen a strong impact on Asian markets, European markets, but when it comes to US markets itself, they have been rattled. Many have said there's going to be a further downside. What are some of the pain points that you expect when it comes to job, when it comes to cost of living?
Well, look at it this way. We all, well, I shouldn't say we all, thank God most of us survived COVID, right? Many millions died. During COVID, there were massive supply chain problems where companies could simply not get parts. If you were building a refrigerator, you might be able to build the shell of the refrigerator, but you might not be able to find a little tube that connects the ice tray to the ice dispenser. So you had refrigerator companies that had items that were 98% done, but they couldn't deliver them because they weren't 100% done. So even though trade may be a smaller part of the US economy, exports are a much smaller part of the US economy than other economies, including India. So for instance, India exports about 22%, I believe, of GDP is from exports. In the US, it's about half that. But still, if the last piece of equipment cannot be accessed, you don't have a refrigerator. Same thing with automobiles. The U.S. automobile companies, even if 98% of the automobile parts were made in the US, if the last 2% includes the radio and somehow that was imported from China or Japan, that becomes a big problem. So we've got product markets that are going to freeze up because of lack of parts. And if they freeze up, that means that the shop foreman tells the workers, well, you better go home. There's no point in building 98% of a car if we can't sell it. That leads to layoffs. And if tariffs are increased, that means there are higher prices on the imports. So all of that is a kind of constellation of chaos that has now been unleashed.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the worries and what certain senators have called for a probe for into insider trading. They went on to say that Donald Trump, by first saying that this is the best time to buy, and a couple of hours later he announces a pause on tariffs. This was nothing short of insider trading. What do you feel about that? Trump's current decision only driven by politics, or could there be a larger economic interest, or are there certain companies or people, individuals getting benefited?
Well, no, honestly, I think it's a silly argument that somehow Trump was manipulating the market in order to make money for himself. No president wants the market to go down. Anytime a president talks about the stock market, he's going to say it looks like a buying opportunity. That's been going on since Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s. I believe that Donald Trump sat in the Oval Office watching television, listening to advisors, and he suddenly decided 90 days, and I'm going to announce it now. I don't think it was a matter of he whispered to various people, hey, buy now. I'm going to make some announcement. Nobody knows about it, but you can make money. No, that's not how it works. President Trump is, in some ways, a mercurial character. He's a in some ways, you could call him a devious character in his pursuit of what he calls the art of the deal. But I don't think it's a matter of trying to enrich certain people by giving them inside information.
Right. We just heard Larry Fink a short while back on CNBC, and he said that it's painful to say, but the U.S. has become the biggest trade destabilizer. And he also said that there is going to be a worry about, embedded inflation in the months to come. Would you agree with him to some extent?
Well, look, ultimately, inflation comes down to what the Federal Reserve does. It comes down to monetary policy. So if Jay Powell, my old buddy from the Treasury Department, if he doesn't provide any more money, then while it is true that the price of imports may go up, there won't be enough money to pay for those and keep other prices where they are. So in other words, the price of imports may go up, but other prices will be forced down. That might mean, for instance, people don't go to restaurants. People conserve or economize on non-imported products. So I think the initial impact of higher tariffs is, yes, prices will be going up. But then what you're going to see is downward pressure on other parts of the economy because there simply won't be enough money in the overall system to pay higher prices for all the imports and pay higher prices for domestic products.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the long-term impact of what Donald Trump has done. Do you feel that a course correction, as some believe that Trump has initiated by putting a pause on the reciprocal tariffs, do you think there will be a further course correction? These reciprocal tariffs will be completely set aside, or you think what has happened right now is going to have a long-term impact and impact the U.S. economy over the next 4 to 5 years?
I think President Trump wants to settle down on the chaos, especially, as I said, in the bond market. Here's what your viewers need to remember about Donald Trump. He began as a developer. Actually, he spent 65 years as a real estate developer. My grandfather was actually a friend and colleague of Trump's father as a real estate developer. What do real estate developers want? Low interest rates, low financing rates. which is why this week, when he saw the chaos leading to a sell-off in U.S. Treasuries, leading to a climb in interest rates, that's when he backed off. So I think he is now bracing himself and trying to figure out how to declare victory on trade without pursuing a global trade war. So maybe increasingly we are focused more and more on China, but I think for countries such as India, where the president has a very warm relationship with Mr. Modi, I think there is going to be better news coming on the trade front. And I'd say the same thing for Japan and many other U.S. trade allies, partners, and competitors. You know, I'd written a piece recently that said nations that march together should trade together. That is, if we, the U.S., have joint naval maneuvers with a country and joint Marine and Army and Air Force maneuvers, we should feel comfortable about trading with them. And I think in this very dangerous world economy, I think that's where the U.S. ultimately will come out, which will give assurance to investors that may take more than a couple days and certainly won't be achieved on a Friday afternoon.
Right. When it comes to relations with China, do you expect the U.S. to try and work out some sort of deal with China? Do you think that kind of a trade agreement would be possible on the kind of terms that Donald Trump may want?
I think a trade agreement is very difficult with China right now. You remember in the first Trump administration, President Trump had done a deal with Mr. Xi for the Chinese to buy various agricultural goods and some manufactured goods. It's unclear whether those investments or those purchases were actually made. And also, I don't think we should be levying all of the blame for what's going on at the White House without recognizing that Mr. Xi in China has declared a, quote, smokeless war, smokeless economic war with the U.S. China has declared its ambition to take over the world economy, to be aggressive and achieve hegemony in Asia. And I think that makes it very dangerous geopolitically as well as economically. So I don't think this trade war with China is going to end very soon, but perhaps the tariffs won't stay up at the lofty 150% level that we see today.
Right. And by when do you expect, as somebody who has worked with the Bush administration, who has worked at the White House closely, when do you expect the dust to really settle? Because I'm sure market observers in India, in the US, and around the world would like to see some certainty returning to the trade patterns.
Well, you might have noticed a change in the spokespeople for the White House. Peter Navarro, who had written a book called Death by China and is anti-free trade, was all over the television last week. This week, he has retreated. He's no longer in front of the cameras, or at least not to the same extent. Instead, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is in front. Scott Bessent is very experienced with Wall Street and the hedge fund community, and very sensitive to price movements and price fluctuations. That means there is now a sense of urgency to calm down the markets and achieve some victories on the trade front, which is why you see Bessent on the phone consulting with the Vietnamese, who immediately want a deal because 87% of their economy depends on exports, with the Japanese, Israelis, and various others with whom the U.S. has a warm relationship.
Right. All right, Todd, thank you so much for joining us with that very important view on where we're headed in terms of the market mood, the sentiment around tariffs, and the course correction also that is taking place simultaneously. We're now going to be taking a short break here on Global Eye, but don't go anywhere. We'll be getting a very important interview with Lisa Curtis, who's also been a senior official at the White House, a former CIA official, a State Department official, and she feels that clearly Trump's trade strategy has backfired, and that's why there is a pause. That interview coming up. Welcome back. Former White House official Lisa Curtis believes Trump administration paused the reciprocal tariffs because the strategy backfired. Curtis was part of the first Trump administration, and she spoke to me on the trade strategy of the Trump administration and the mood inside the White House as well.
Well, I think the goal of the Trump administration is to bring manufacturing back to the United States. This is something that Trump was committed to on the campaign trail. So, it's not surprising that he is putting a lot of effort into bringing manufacturing back, bringing jobs back to the United States. I think the problem is how the tariffs were rolled out, and the fact that not only has he targeted U.S. adversaries, particularly China, but he has also levied tariffs on allies and partners, including some allies that the U.S. had a trade surplus with. So it hasn't made a lot of sense to people why he would do these broad tariffs on so many nations, including allies and partners. And I think it did backfire, and that's why he has stepped back and he's put on this 90-day moratorium. So, unfortunately, I think that the way the tariffs were rolled out, there didn't seem to be a good strategy in place, and it seemed like a haphazard approach to applying tariffs, across the board, across the world, and it badly backfired on him. So there may be, a lesson learned here. But right now, of course, the tariffs are still on with China, and the U.S. and China are virtually in a trade war. And so the question is, how will this impact the U.S. economy? And I think we've yet to see how it will all play out for the average U.S. consumer.
Right. Lisa, it's quite clear that Donald Trump is using trade as a weapon and trade as a centerpiece of foreign policy relations with other nations. Yes, the tariffs have been paused, and you're saying that it's clear that somewhere the administration realized that the policy is backfiring. But this was long coming. Since his campaign, he has been saying that he will apply reciprocal tariffs, and the world has been very unfair to America. This was in the plan for the last 2 to 3 months. What do you think made the administration realize that, hey, we've made a mistake and we need to pause?
Well, I think one of the main reasons that we're seeing these tariffs and such a over focus on tariffs. It's really a one-track strategy. If you ask me, there is probably a broader strategy, a broader economic strategy, if you really want to bring manufacturing back to the United States, that you can't just rely on tariffs. But unfortunately, I think his advisors, people like Peter Navarro, who has been all tariffs all the time. He's written books about it. I think that he has influenced President Trump, and that's why we saw the disagreement. I think over the weekend, Elon Musk was very clear that he disagreed with this strategy, and he wanted to see the U.S. negotiating. And I think it's good that he came out and gave another perspective to this Peter Navarro pro-tariff perspective. So, in that case, I think some of the infighting within the Trump administration played out in a way that helped the United States in the end, because it did, finally lead President Trump to back off on our, tariffs across the board, even against our allies and partners. So, in a way, it was a course correction, and I think we can just hope that, there was some learning there, and that we'll see a better thought out strategy, rather than just, thinking you can disrupt the entire system, overturn the tray and hope for the best. That's not really how one should go about achieving your goals and objectives.
Right. In the first Trump administration, we had seen a lot of high-level exits. People who did not get along with Donald Trump were fired. Do you see a repeat of that? Do you think the current infighting in the Trump administration is worse than what it was earlier?
I do. I think that this time around you have individuals who have individual agendas, and they are bringing these to the fore, and there is a lot of different camps. You know, you have the camp that is very focused on domestic issues and wants to take a more isolationist view toward foreign policy. This camp is, almost anti-Europe. They aren't interested in seeing those traditional alliances preserved, not really remembering why we have those alliances in the first place, the whole history of World War II, how these alliances have kept the peace largely all these years, how we share values with our European allies. That crowd just is ignoring that. The second crowd are more the traditional foreign policy people. I would put Michael Waltz, Marco Rubio in that camp, and they have been supportive of our traditional alliances. They are interested in competing with China. And then you have another category, which would be the pro-business, the tech giants, the business executives who are looking more at the economic piece of this. But even within those three broad categories, you have differences among individuals. And so it is causing a lot of chaos, I think. Many of us are hoping that there's some order brought to this process. When I was at the National Security Council, we always tried to have a very deliberate process and to bring the president options. These are the options. This is most likely, what will happen. Of course, the president makes the final decision, but you need to bring informed options. You need to rely on your experts who have been, following the issues, know the issues, and can bring you some very sound policy advice. So hopefully we'll see more of a national security process put in place.
But why is he in a
future.
rush? Why is Donald Trump in a rush in his second term?
Well, I think he knows, he only has, 3.5 more years. He's already had one term in office. According to our Constitution, he can only have 2 terms. So I think he does feel that he needs to make some of these big changes that maybe he didn't have the opportunity to do the first time around. But, he also has said he wants to be known for being a peacemaker. I think this is very important to him, is trying to show that he can, really make this a more peaceful world. But unfortunately, I'm seeing some contradictions. The whole peace through strength idea won't be played out if the U.S. abandons Ukraine, if Russia's able to use military might, to change borders. I don't think that bodes well for a peace through strength legacy for President Trump.
Right. My final question to you would be about China. U.S. has paused reciprocal tariffs, but kept them on China and increased it to 145%. That is the latest clarification. China is retaliating. How bad is this for world security, and how could China take advantage of the global situation?
Well, I think that the developing trade war between the U.S. and China will be harmful to the global economy. It's going to hurt the economies of both the United States and China. And, sort of who suffers more, we've yet to see. But I think, once the American consumer starts to really feel the bite of these tariffs, I think you're going to see a great deal of pushback. The U.S. is a democracy, so people aren't going to hold back in terms of their complaints to the Trump administration. So that, I think, let's watch that space and see what happens. But the second part of your question, I think, is very relevant, because as the U.S. is pulling back on foreign assistance, implementing tariffs against its allies and partners, it's going to lose that soft power that has served it well in the past. And I think that the vacuum that the lack of U.S. foreign assistance and sort of benevolence being shown to other parts of the world, particularly the global South, China is going to be the beneficiary of that. There's going to be a vacuum, and China will step in. So in that respect, I think the U.S. does suffer in its overall strategic competition with China. I think that soft power element to the competition with China is important. Right. And unfortunately, the U.S. is going to lose out on that as it sort of pulls back from its engagement with the global South and partnering with countries.
All right, so this is the big concern that Lisa Curtis, a former White House official, is expressing, that with these tariff wars, what U.S. is doing, it's emerging as an unreliable partner. It is ceding the soft power space position that it has enjoyed in the world, and it is China which is keen to grab that position. On that note, we take a short break, and that will be the end of Global Eye. Keep watching CNBC-TV18 for more news and updates.